what kind of guiding principles might we be able to use that would allow us to understand where to direct our
Right.
experimental efforts. And I mean, to me, that's very complementary to the approach that my part of the field is more focused on at the moment, which is you're trying to make sure, okay, let's not miss something stupid, right? Like let's not miss
Yeah.
an
You
obvious
need
honking dark matter signal because we just didn't know how to do the analysis.
Yeah, you need the Sherlock Holmes using deduction to try to figure out where to look, but sometimes you need the 30 people arm in arm sweeping the field. Just
Exactly.
what are we going to find? Maybe you find this key piece of evidence that changes the whole investigation. But speaking of the research that you guys do, I mean, this one I think is one of the most offensive statements that Sabina makes. What she says here, what happened instead is that everyone who works on this just repeats arguments that they all know to be wrong to keep the money coming, because let's be real, these people sit on cozy tax-paid positions with no other task than producing useless papers that no one understands and therefore no one dares criticize. So contrary to everything that we've been talking about, you know you're wrong. You and all your colleagues know you're wrong, and you're lying to keep the funding coming in. Your papers are useless. They're gibberish. Nobody understands them, and it's all just to keep the money flowing. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I think, if I wanted to make a lot of money, there would be much easier ways to do it than this.
Like making YouTube videos, I think would make more money, at least the way she
Oh, well,
does it.
I mean, I don't know that YouTube videos are that easy, but let me say one thing because I think this is actually important. So I've sometimes people ask like, what do you think is the most important trait of a scientist? People who are like, oh, am I smart enough to be a physicist? Like, am I, do I have the math skills needed for this? And to me, the most important trait of a scientist is integrity. And like bar none. I mean, curiosity is really like curiosity, I would say, is probably the second most important. And then like intelligence and willingness to work hard. But the most important thing is integrity. Like in the absence of integrity, all of those good qualities can be useless or actively detrimental in the case of like people who falsify data, something like that. The goal here is to understand the truth. I mean, we're trying to understand how the universe works at a fundamental level, to understand things that, nobody in human history has ever been able to figure out. And that is really hard. And we only do it by working together and being honest and candid about the things we understand and the things we don't understand. And
Mhm.
that's my goal. So if anybody thinks that I am repeating arguments that I know to be wrong, I would really like them to tell me that directly and point out what it said and explain like why it's wrong and why they think I know that it's wrong, right? I mean, I'm sure that of course, I'm sure that I have said things offhand that are not completely correct just by accident. I really appreciate when people point that out so I can fix it. And
Right.
like these are I statements, but I mean, I do actually feel that this is generally the case in my field, and that my colleagues are generally focused on getting the right answer, on getting the truth. I mean, this is what we're motivated by. We want to understand the universe. I mean, and you could say, "Oh, Tracy, you're being so naive," but I mean, let me tell you a story. So when I was a young PhD student, I was working on one of my first real research projects, and I was trying to reproduce in the literature from a paper that was pretty well known, and I tried to reproduce it, and I got a different answer. So I checked it several times, and after checking it several times, I was still not getting the right answer. And well, one variation of my calculation had gotten the same answer, but I was pretty sure that variation was wrong. So I thought about this for a bit, and then I got my nerve together and I emailed the authors to say, hey, I think your paper is wrong. Now, this was a pretty well-known paper. It had been out for about 6 years. The authors were extremely prominent people in the field, and I was a second-year grad student who had written
Mhm.
one paper. So I was pretty nervous about this. Like, I had, and also I was like, oh, the paper is 6 years old. Even if they're nice, it's probably going to take them a long time to check it. But what actually happened was that about 2 days after I sent that email, they wrote back to me and said, so I had suggested in my email, maybe the error is X because I had gotten the same answer as them when I made this particular error. About 2 days later, they wrote back to me. They said, you're right. We checked it. We went back to the paper. We confirmed. We agree that this is the error. We have fixed what we think is the error. Here is the modified version of our result. Can you check it against what you're getting and tell us if you get the same answer?
Wow.
And and I checked it and it agreed. And I wrote back to them and said, yes, we're good. And they said, great. we'll correct the paper and acknowledge you. And a day or two later, my advisor called me into his office and said, hey, look at this. And there was an email from the senior person on that paper thanking my advisor for like saying, like it's great that your student found this error, and is she looking for a job? So
Wow.
like this was a really senior person in the field. This was like a student with no reputation emailing them to say, hey, I think you made a mistake in a kind of prominent paper that lots of people had cited. And his immediate reaction was, great, let's fix the mistake. And this student is great. Maybe I should see if they want a job.
Yeah.
And to me, that is like both an example of how you should handle this situation. Like it's my example of how I try to handle it when people tell me about problems. And it reflects the fact that, the leaders of our field really do generally want to find the truth. I mean, similarly, if somebody tells me that there's something wrong in one of my papers, my first reaction is first like, oh, right, I should check that. And if they're correct, like, great, thank you so much. I mean, I hope my papers are, you said like, are my papers useless? Well, I mean, I hope they're useful. I spend a lot of time and effort on my papers. In general, the reason I write papers is because they answer a question where I'm personally interested in knowing the answer. Like, if I was not personally interested in knowing the answer, it would be very hard to motivate myself to do all that work. But I mean, like anybody else, I can have bugs in code. I can, there can be some place where I've made a mistake. If somebody else can like try to reproduce the work and point out to me where the bug is or where the problem is, that's great. Like, I mean,
Right.
because it allows me to make the paper actually correct.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
very,
sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead, finish.
In terms of what my papers do, I mean, I've discovered new structures in our galaxy, shining in gamma rays. I've built software that lets us predict how dark matter interactions with ordinary matter could have changed the history of the universe, how we would know that it was happening if it was there. I've showed, in like recent papers, I've been trying to figure out how to resolve some apparent paradoxes that show up when you try to calculate the rate of certain processes using quantum mechanics. I mean, I did all of these because they were questions that I'm interested in. I hope they're interesting to other people as well. I don't feel like I'm entitled to receive funding to answer these questions, but the way the process works is I apply for grants, which are reviewed competitively. I tell the funding agencies what I would like to work on, and sometimes they give me the money, and sometimes they don't.
Right.
If they do give me the money, then I proceed. And I mean, I'm very grateful that the US government and taxpayers have historically felt that it's worthwhile to fund people like me to answer questions like this that are more about figuring out what's going on in our universe and less about practical applications. But yeah, I mean
Yes.
that's
We
what
have a
that's
rich
what I think
history
I'm
of that.
doing.
We have a rich history of that, and that status is in jeopardy in this current administration. I mean, just everything you're describing. If it's interesting to you, presumably it's interesting to other people in the field. You clearly understand each other's papers, otherwise you could not be correcting each other and agreeing on the corrections. And furthermore, did the avalanche of gratuitous funding cease because the prominent researcher had made an error? No. They acknowledged an error, corrected the paper, and then they continue along with their illustrious career. I mean, I really hope that anecdotes such as yours can help serve. I want the public to understand how the scientific community actually operates, not the caricature that demagogues like Sabine put out. I want people to know what you guys do, and I can only say so much since I'm not a scientist.
No, I really appreciate it. I'll also say that, I mean, at least in my field, it actually gets you a lot of social status and kudos if you can prove that something is wrong, that
Of
prominent
course.
people in the field had said was right. Like, this is not this we give a lot of credit to people who demonstrate that a widely held view was in fact
Yeah.
incorrect.
It's the
Um,
quickest way to get a paper or even a Nobel, right? It's
It,
basically.
it it can be, yeah. Yeah, or a faculty job. And I guess maybe the last thing I'll say is, regarding this cozy taxpayer funded jobs, well, two things. First, that there is a practical reason why governments tend to fund basic research, which is that if you get a lot of smart, motivated people together and ask them to solve difficult problems, the solutions they come up with very often have applications beyond the original questions. I
Yes.
mean, the reason I'm doing this is because I want to understand the universe, not because of some spin-off technology. But as it turns out, a sort of fairly common trajectory is something like you give me money to figure out a new experimental design for searching for a particular type of dark matter. And my awesome experimentalist colleague looks at this and goes, oh, that's really cool. I'll design a new type of quantum sensor so I can make that design work
Yes.
better. And then that sensor ends up having applications
Better
outside physics.
computing, better propulsion, better whatever. Um, Yeah, what
Yeah.
lawmakers and all these people they're just smart enough to know that let the smart people do their science and we get stuff from it. We don't know what it's going to be. Even they don't know what it's going to be yet.
Yeah,
But we do the science.
but it
That's the rich tradition that we
historically
live with.
seems to have mostly worked out.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of this is, where does the funding go when taxpayers give me funding for my research? It's not going to my salary. My salary is being paid by MIT. Like, I mean, I'm
Mhm.
being taught to teach classes and to run a research group there.
Right.
Where almost all the funding, so in experiment, the funding can go to actually build the machines that we use to test these hypotheses. But in theory, almost all the funding goes to funding PhD students and funding postdoctoral researchers.
Yeah.
And those jobs are not particularly cozy. The typical trajectory for a researcher in my field is that you do your undergrad degree. So you finish a very math-heavy, difficult, challenging undergraduate degree. If you're going to go into grad school, you're typically somebody who has really excellent grades. You could go get a job in finance or consulting or tech, and your friends who do that instead are going to be making
Way.
significantly more than twice as much money as you from the very start. And
Yeah.
instead, you go off to do a PhD, which is not very well paid. Like you're going to be living with roommates for the next 5 years while your friends are going and like buying houses, starting their jobs, and
Hmm.
having kids. You
Yeah.
do that for 5 years. Then you graduate with your PhD. Then you do postdoctoral research for at least 3 years. 6 to 9 years are more common. You have to apply for a new job and move to a new city or sometimes a new country every 2 to 3 years. And, like the rate of pay for postdocs is not terrible, but it's also way, way, way less than
Yeah.
people with comparable
And that's another
qualifications
few years.
can
Yeah.
make in
You're
the
in your
private
30s
sector.
before you're getting even decent wages.
When
Yeah.
again, so I mean, I did my PhD at Harvard. It was a good school. So I'm definitely not complaining about my own situation. Like I love my job. I feel extremely privileged and extremely grateful to the people who support my work for allowing me to do what I do because it's fantastic. But I'm not in this area because I'm motivated by money.
Yeah.
When I was a grad student in the final year of my PhD at Harvard, like I had my dream postdoc job lined up. I was so happy. I felt so fortunate. My dream postdoc job was at the Institute for Advanced Study, where Einstein also worked. It paid $60,000 a year.
Hmm.
That whole last year, I was getting emails from consulting and finance firms in New York City who were like, "Come work for us. Starting salary is $200,000 a year plus bonuses."
Right.
And I remember kind of looking at this and being like, "Oh, on one hand, that's a lot of money, but."
But you have these questions that you need answered. I mean, it's
Right.
the idea to me that you and your colleagues are sitting around popping champagne bottles. Ha ha ha! Those idiots are sending us more money to do absolutely nothing. What a great job we have. I mean, it's just like I can't believe anybody could fall for this kind of characterization. But yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
again, like I definitely don't want it to be like I'm complaining about. I mean, I have been super fortunate. I am really, really lucky to be able to work at a place like MIT with the awesome postdocs and students that I work with, and I am very grateful that our community as a whole is willing to fund people like me to explore these questions about how the universe works. Um, and to support the amazing students and postdocs who do a lot of who really do a huge amount of the hands-on research. But like, I mean, this is not the easy pathway, and this is not the pathway that you follow if you're primarily motivated by making money.
correct. Yeah, very true. Well, thank you so much for your perspective. You and your colleagues.